So what I used to do earlier, like when I started, like instead of like introducing someone, like I just started the conversation. Abhi jaise apan ne kiya hai, like we just started the conversation.
Yeah.
Like I think this is also one of the good way to start a podcast because
Yeah.
so let me just start the introduction as well. So guys, for today's episode, we have with Jivraj Singh. He's working in venture operations at Angelist India, and he's a host at Indian Silicon Valley podcast. So it is one of the top business podcasts in India, and it's also featured as top 10 business podcasts in Spotify as well. So I'm super excited to have you, Jivraj. So let's tell us more about yourself, like what is going on with you, and your work as well.
For sure. Thanks for having me, Pushpak, for starters. I think super glad to be chatting with you and knowing more about the podcast and what you've been doing as well. But to get started, I think for me, I've been spending a majority of my time at work at Angelist, which is where I lead venture operations, which is to say that a bunch of things, what we're doing at Angelist, building products for founders and investors in the early stage ecosystem that gets championed in terms of, let's say, the investor relations and business development. That's what I do on the job. And I happen to run a podcast, which I started almost 2 years back now. Seems like, seems like yesterday, but it's been 2 years already. The podcast is called Indian Silicon Valley. And for those who may not be aware, this is a podcast where I speak to a bunch of founders and investors. I've been doing this a week on week of every week since the first Sunday I began, which was on 16th August. And it's come a long way, but then I try to decode company building strategies from the people who've been there, done that. And that's been a phenomenal project for me personally as a learning experience. And in turn, I've also been able to share some of my experiences on the podcast and share some of the founders' experiences so that other young builders can benefit from it. So yes, that's what I do with the podcast, and that's what I do on the job.
Awesome. So, like, I'm just guessing this. Like, did you started a podcast in the pandemic? Like, 2 years back means pandemic, right?
Yeah. This was amidst the
yeah,
pandemic. Yes.
yeah. So, like, you have recorded like almost 90 plus episodes. So, how did you started this podcast? And like, also, why did you started it?
Yeah, so I think I was like, I was a kid who wanted to, like, let's say, start a company, right? And I didn't come from a technical background, so I always felt like, okay, how should I do this? What should I do? And I played around with a bunch of projects. I started a blog of sorts, which is called Ace Humans, and that I was running. But I wanted to do something tangible, and the way I realized I could do that is A, I had to learn a lot. B, I could try and build it out myself. So I did both of those things. The first one I targeted with the podcast, and I was like, okay, I've been doing a blog, but can I do something more specific where I get to learn? And there are more people like me, because I looked at the resources out there. And to everybody's credit, there are a lot of resources in the Indian startup ecosystem which are very information first, which is to say that, okay, this company is doing this much. They have raised these many funds, and these are the investors, right? While this gives me a lot of good information, as a young builder, I feel a lack of context to, okay, how did they build what they did, right? What is the second level of conversation that happened with them? And what is the second level of insight that I can derive from them? And since I realized that there was nobody else doing it, I was like, okay, what's the worst that can happen? I end up learning for sure to these people. And there are more people like me who will also probably like to cherish it. I didn't know any better at the time either. So that kind of naivety also helped. And I started, to be honest, right? The idea was, okay, there is some value to be added. There's distinct value rather to be added. And I will definitely learn, and this will be a great learning experience. So why not go out there and get this done? Thankfully, I started, and I think it's one of the best decisions I've taken. When I started, of course, it was not as easy, but the advantage was that people, this was at the time, May, June of 2020, where everybody was still figuring out, okay, what the hell is happening in the world? And people were mostly more or less free, and they were back in their houses, they didn't know where to spend time. And so I think I was able to catch on to that. People were agreeing faster than I expected. And I started small. I figured out, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this for 6 months every week. I promised myself. And I was like, we'll see where it goes and then reevaluate. So it was a 6-month experiment that I took up in May 2020, released my episode months later, which was in August, right? And then I realized 6 months in that this was definitely something I love and I'm going to continue doing. But the idea broadly was, can I identify something unique? Can I learn from an experience? And can I keep doing something that I would discover multiple things about myself about? And I think the podcast fit really well in all of those aspects. And it's come a
Right.
long way
Yeah,
since.
yeah. So, as you mentioned about like you promised yourself that you will record this, you'll do this for like next 6 months and consistent, like 1 week.
Wow.
I think I assume you must have recorded one podcast a week, right?
Yeah.
So, why did you like give yourself the time of 6 months, like, and along with that, how do you stay consistent? Because as a content creators or as a podcast host, as like one of the most challenges people face, like myself, I have gone through this. Like I'm not very consistent, right? So how
Mm.
to become a consistent? I think I'm asking a lot of questions in a one thing, but how do you get consistent, and why do you like give yourself 6 months as well at the same time?
Sure. Yeah, no, I think very relevant questions, right? And I'll tell you about the second one is rather straightforward. The idea was I wanted to give myself enough time to absorb
Mm-hmm.
what I was doing and also test out whether or not it works. So the idea was that 6 months would be a long enough time frame for me to
Mm-hmm.
know whether or not what I'm doing is something that I like, something that other people like, and something that has value in pursuing.
Yeah.
And I also didn't want to give myself too little time to judge, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
I can't expect instant results, right? So I was okay with the fact that, okay, I'll take it as a 6 month experiment and
Mm-hmm.
see where it goes. So it was important for me to have a certain sense of, okay, when can I reevaluate whether or not this is working? Because I didn't want to be blindsided with the fact that, okay, I want to do this with no expectations or anything of the kind, right? Because there
Yeah.
inevitably becomes something that you're
Mm-hmm.
expecting something. But it's good to have like a milestone in mark so that you can reevaluate, be intellectually honest to yourself and see whether or not something's working. So that was why I thought, 6 months and then reevaluate, see where it goes.
Mm-hmm.
And but the first point of consistency, I think that's one of the things that I mean, I don't think I do a lot of things really, really well, or there's so much to learn in most aspects. But I think consistency is one thing that I feel really glad about myself about as well. Because I mean, it's now been 90 odd weeks, and it was not
Mm-hmm.
just the first 6 months that I stayed consistent. I mean, to date, every Sunday since I started, I've published one episode
Wow.
without fail. And being able to do that honestly means it's a personal feed that teaches me so much. It helps me
Mm-hmm.
build habits.
Yeah.
It helps me, understand the value of compounding. And everything that I do is now coming from a point that, okay, I've seen what the impact of doing something over a year and a half, week on week can be. I can now replicate this over time.
Yeah.
Now the tougher part is how to stay consistent, not whether or to be consistent.
Mm-hmm.
How to be consistent is just a matter of, I think what helped is when I started the podcast, I didn't have too much on hand. So I was able to create these systems and build these habits that it just became a part of me. So
Yeah.
even when I, started running like a full-time day job, which was very, very intensive, I realized that this is already a part of my system. So let's say every Friday evening or Friday night today, for instance, I will edit a podcast, right? It's just become a part of my system. I mean, if
Mm-hmm.
you were to take me out, I'd probably feel bad because I know what I do or what I have done for a
Yeah.
while. And then
Mm-hmm.
every weekend, I know I'm going to spend a couple of hours on the podcast itself. So the
Mm-hmm.
idea here is if you genuinely want to achieve something, I mean, everybody's going to be busy and I know everybody's going to try. But I think what only helped me and it worked for me is just being able to develop these habits that would ingrain myself into the system of publishing an episode without fail, and then just being true to yourself, right? So you don't have to go the extra mile of taking the trouble of doing so. But the idea is if you can be true to yourself and have that ownership that, okay, I'm doing this for myself, because I don't think I'm doing it for anybody else, right? This is
Yeah.
just a
Yeah.
personal thing where I want to ensure I'm consistent. And I think that helps. So I think ownership and building habits is what I would say on consistency.
Yeah. That's amazing, and like completely makes sense. But sometimes what happened, like it used to happen with me a lot. Like I used to not post a podcast, and like I don't know, there was a laziness, or maybe I didn't had the right reason. But like recently, I started recording a lot of podcasts. So I'm
Yeah.
like trying to collect content. So like I think a lot of content creators do that. So like you can record a piece of content. Like maybe you can record 10 podcasts, because if you don't have, you might not be able to record maybe in the future. So you already have a lot
Yeah.
of podcasts recorded, so you can post it consistently. So that is also another thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you are also founder and storyteller at AEC Human. So what exactly that is about? So and you started this before podcast, right?
Yes, so this was actually in its first form, it was an Instagram blog where I was very fascinated by stories of other people, especially people who had done things differently, right? So think of a
Mm-hmm.
sportsman or an Olympian, or think of like I don't know, comedian or a scientist or a actor or a painter, whatnot,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I was
Yeah.
always very fascinated because I mean, through college and stuff, I was a part of the TEDx community. I started TEDx on campus, and I realized that okay, this is something that interests me. Very naively, again, I was like, okay, I want to learn from them. So I used to get on a
Mm-hmm.
call with people, and I used to like, it was inspired from this, humans of Bombay, humans of New York
Yeah.
sort of an
Mm-hmm.
initiative, because I wanted to learn from these stories, put it out there for people, and in the hope that everybody can cumulatively
Mm-hmm.
learn from them. I would get on a call with somebody, I would understand their story very broadly, their journey, and then put it in a narrative and publish it.
Okay.
This was
Mm-hmm.
an Instagram blog which turned into like a website, and we had a team around it. Some of the best people that I found from college,
Mm-hmm.
some of them juniors, some of them seniors, some of them peers, and we formed this very small team of sorts. Over a period of a year, I think we were able to get 200 to 50 odd interviews in cumulatively, and it was a great platform to just have so much diversity. I mean, from talking to a NASA researcher to talking to a painter from the Netherlands, and who had later shifted to Amsterdam, to talking
Mm-hmm.
to one of the Olympians from India. It was like such a variety. It was a varied experience that I can't thank enough. That was my first actual sense with at all content creation, right? I didn't know what it
Mm-hmm.
was at the time. It was
Right.
more like a
Right.
way to express myself. And it's not like
Mm-hmm.
I'm the most creative person out there, but the idea was that, okay, can I just grasp all of these stories and put it out there?
Yeah.
And thankfully it worked out well. So that was Ace Humans,
Mm.
where Ace was basically, Ace standing for the traditional, triumphant folks, right? Ace
Mm-hmm.
being the pack of the first in the pack of the cards.
Yeah.
And we also had an acronym that we made internally. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that was the story with Ace Humans.
Yeah, so I think that also, like, storytelling and all that could have, like, must have helped you in building podcast as well.
Certainly, I think the experiences that I had early on with Ace Humans, and I think that's where passion projects help, right? Anything that you
Mm-hmm.
take up as a passion project that you do for yourself, just transform your personality in such a positive manner. Because I was able to learn content creation, I was able to understand, how does a creative blog work? I was able to understand stories. I was able to learn personally so much. I was able to interact better with people, and all of that just because of these experiences that I started off with Ace, and started off like as a random experiment that I didn't even know where it would go.
Yeah.
But the fact that we could take it forward decently far was really heartening, and it turned out to be one of, again, it set the stage well for me to do other things and express
Mm-hmm.
myself even better.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
So, like, you talked to almost 100 founders, right? Like, from last 2 years. So what are, like, some of the lessons which you have learned from talking to these people? Like, any top three lessons? Yeah.
Sure, I think that's something I spend a lot of my time understanding, because
Mm-hmm.
the podcast is not just. I mean, I don't look at it from a pure perspective of content. And Harry Stebbings says this, where he thinks of the podcast as a library of insights, right, and a library
Mm-hmm.
of data points, which, if mapped very well, can give you incredible results. For me, on the Indian Silicon Valley podcast, I think if I were to condense three learnings, I think one would be insane ambition, right? I think Gaurav Munjal puts this really well, that you can do as much as you uh, dream, right? You can never do more than you dream. So if you
Mm-hmm.
limit your dreams by your ambition, then you're probably doing a disservice to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
What that means is, if you can't even think it, you can probably not achieve it, right? So I think founders are this breed of people who I think have the best kind of ambition. Like, no mountain is too tough for them to climb, or is too
Mm-hmm.
far or too high. They will go ahead and cross any mountain you that comes across, and they will believe that they can do it, right? And I think
Yeah.
that's the second point. Having ambition is one thing, having belief is the second point, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have this almost irrational sense of belief, right? It's almost, you can confuse it with disbelief also, right? Because
Yeah.
they
Mm-hmm.
believe that they can make reality happen from nothing to something in ways that you can probably not imagine. So ambition and belief becomes such a core component of starting a company. And I
Mm-hmm.
think for any human for that matter, right? Not just for starting a company, but in life in general, if you have ambition and if you can back it up with belief, I think it makes a lot of sense. For the third one, I think it matters more in terms of there's something about the journey. So about founders, I mean, they are probably the people who deal with the most ups and downs, right? On one day,
Mm-hmm.
there's everything's broken. On another day, something's sorted.
Yeah, yeah.
On the third day, everything again is broken. So it's very up and down. And there's this belief that humans have this sinusoidal wave, right? So we are
Mm-hmm.
happy, then we're sad, then we're happy. For founders, this wave just crosses very fast. And so for them, that wave is not a wave, it's a straight line, because for them the day to day is just so cherishable, right? They are enjoying every day to the fullest,
Mm-hmm.
irrespective of whether it's a high, whether it's a
Yeah,
low.
yeah.
And so that really surprises me, because then they don't live for the highs, they don't get dejected by the lows. They work because they know that they are so mission driven and they're enjoying it so much that they
Mm-hmm.
just want to continue. And I think that is just spectacular. And again, it's one of those things that applies to life very well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah.
if we live for the successes only, when the success comes, you're probably going to fade away because it was very short lived, right? Because
Yeah.
a success or a milestone is only a point in time. What's continuous is actually the journey. So if you
Yeah, yeah.
actually cherish what you are building, you will inevitably survive through everything that comes through
Mm-hmm.
in a very acceptable manner. So I think that piece is one of the most important learnings I have taken back, and I personally try to replicate in my day to day as well. But I think those are the broad three learnings that I really have. Maybe generic, I think
Mm-hmm.
makes a lot
Yeah,
of
yeah,
sense and
yeah.
is something that I have personally observed decently closely.
Yeah. So, like, as you said about mission, like that is very important thing. Like, there's why these founders have all this, they're putting a lot of efforts and all because of the mission that they have, right? Otherwise, like we can call it purpose, we can call it mission, but that is what they're living for. Like, so that's what, something, like there is something which is like, matlab, sabse upar, like, I don't know how do I put it in the right way, but not for people, like something better, like you're not working for yourself, you're working for your mission basically. So that's
Yeah,
what,
there's
like,
something.
yeah, that makes
Yeah, no,
sense.
I think, yeah, there's something bigger than themselves, right? There's
Yeah,
something
right, that's what I
larger
was.
than life
Mhm.
that they're going forward for.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and that exactly is the mission and the purpose.
exactly.
Very rightly said. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, when it comes to mission, right? So how do you find a mission? Like, I think lot of people, lot of youngsters, like, they are not stable in life. Because I think one of the reason is they are not able to find a mission, right? So how does this
Yeah.
entrepreneurs find the mission, and how, if I want to find my mission, right? So how do I find a mission, right? So I think that is also important question. So what do you think about that?
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I think when we think about like what is mission is more important to decode to answer any of those questions. And I feel mission is anything but that sense of passion that can evolve into a sense of impact, right? And can add value. Now, without getting it to making it too complicated, was the mission for, let's say, an academy, right? It is to provide high quality education for everyone. Now,
Mm-hmm.
how do we know the founders found that mission? We don't, but it started off as a YouTube channel, right? Which was to
Mm-hmm.
ensure that, okay, anybody who wants access to high quality education, there were two people who were just sharing their lessons. And so
Mm-hmm.
eventually they productized it. The
Yeah,
idea is that if you find something that you're passionate about in life and figure that out, it often takes time. Some people are more lucky than the others, where
yeah, yeah.
somebody finds it earlier, somebody finds it late. But the idea is that you have to keep at and want to find that passion, right? And then once you found it, you just have to follow it to ensure that gets converted to that end mission, and then you work towards it, right? So it takes a while, right? So like with the podcast, for instance, for me, I don't very often mull too much about who are the listeners or how many listens am I getting. I'm not getting too many, I get frustrated. That's
Mm-hmm.
not the case, because my mission is to ensure anybody who wants to become a founder,
Mm-hmm.
can they have access to high quality content where they can understand how to build a company.
Right.
And if I can do that for even one or two people, I think I would have fulfilled that mission. That scale can of course increase. I can
Yeah.
productize this, I can, I don't know, make an app out of it, whatnot, right? But the idea is that that's my central mission. And so as long as I'm enjoying each piece of the pie that I continue to make towards that mission, that's all that matters, right? So I'm following through. So the idea is that I mean, did I know this from day one? No, it was probably me just trying to explore a bunch of things. And there's a good chance it wouldn't have worked, right? But then I would have moved on to something else. So I think the overarching aspect of finding a mission is first recognizing that you need one, two, then following through on not giving up on finding it, right? Like it's not like you go out there and get it. It takes time. It will take a lot of iterations. It'll take a lot of consciousness, self-awareness, self-acceptance, truth. But if it happens, I think it's one of the best things that people can figure out. And I think, there's this TED talk which talks about what matters more than life, more than happiness in life. And one of the first points, I mean, 2 points there. One is meaning, second is purpose, the third is storytelling, and I think the fourth is impact. So I think that goes to show how important meaning can be and how transformational it can be for somebody in their lifetime.
Totally. So I think, as you said, like you mentioned it in a pretty understanding manner. Like I got the idea what exactly you're trying to say. So like about like if you want to try, like if you want to figure out your mission, I think you have to try multiple things. You have to experiment a lot. That's the only you will find, like this is my purpose, or this is what I aligned with. This is what I should work on. So
Yeah.
So was there any point in your journey where things were not going really well for you, or you were kind of, at your lowest? Maybe some failures happened. So if something like this happened, so like tell us about that and how you got out of it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple, right? I mean, it's always, and now that I think, I mean, there's so much to do, to be honest. But I think one instance that comes to mind is I mean, I had to shift from science to commerce when I was when I was getting into college, because I was a science student in 11 and 12. And I realized early on that, okay, the competitive exam race is not meant for me. So I knew I was going to change to commerce. But when that shift happened, right, it seemed pretty drastic. And I don't know if it qualifies as a failure, or I don't want to like mull over it that much. But the idea then was, it felt like I set out to do something, but I could not. And I had to change my pathway drastically to adjust to it. And so that didn't feel great in the moment, because I was in a different place. I had to figure out a bunch of things from scratch. But I think that's one of the best things that ended up happening to me, right? Because it taught me so much. It set me in the right direction that would actually be beneficial for me in life. But one of those moments where it felt like everything was dark. And I think the other was, I mean, the job I had out of campus, I didn't end up taking that because it was a job in core finance. And I realized I want to do something more immersive, something where where I can express myself even more. And I joined a startup. And that didn't work out quite well, to be honest, right? Like the startup didn't fly. We had to shut it down and stuff like that. And so there was a point where I was left without a job, and it felt like, okay, why is this happening and stuff like that. But thankfully, it was again one of the best things that happened, because post that I landed up at Angelist, which has been incredibly fulfilling, and it's been full of growth and full of learning. So I think, thankfully, I mean, I've had those phases, but I've been able to come out of it in some shape or form, and that continues to happen. But the idea is that, I mean, having this, like going back to, what founders think, having that ambition and belief in those times really matters. Like you have to believe that irrespective of whatever's happening, things will work out, because in the long run, inevitably it does. So in the moment, it can feel like that's the worst thing that's happening to you. But you will realize, I mean, the maturity that comes, and I've only been able to develop this maturity by talking to people, is that in the moment, if it seems too much, just take a step back and tell yourself that it's going to be fine either way. And in the next quarter, it's not going to seem like a big deal. So manage it accordingly, and hopefully you'll be able to weather the storm.
Yeah, that's very insightful and interesting, man. And I think we could say that like you wanted to get into science, but you had to go for commerce, right? But it's turns out it was really good for you. So another thing with your startup as well. So I think whatever happens, it kind of happens for a reason in life. Maybe it could be anything, right? But I think we can always learn from it and get better at other things as well.
Certainly,
Awesome.
I think, change is the only constant, and adapting to such situations is what counts. So,
Right,
yeah,
right.
I feel very fortunate that at each step where it felt really bad, I was able to come out of it and only go to a better situation. So, yeah, thankfully, it worked out well for me.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So, these are the like last couple of questions, like short questions. So, what are your top like three favorite books first? Yeah.
Three favorite books.
Yeah.
No, I mean, that's interesting. I mean, I recently read this book called Creative Confidence, which
Mm-hmm.
is by, I think, two Wellies who are from Stanford. They started the D School at Stanford University. And I felt that was a great book. Then on normal front, some of the generic ones that I really like. One is Outliers by Malcolm
Mm-hmm.
Gladwell, and the other is Think Again by Adam Grant. And I follow Adam Grant decently closely. I think he's one of the prolific modern day thinkers. He's an organizational, I think, professor at Wharton, and very, very great modern day thinker. So I think, yeah, these are a couple of books that I really like and have read recently.
So, are there any people like, or maybe three people you know in your life which kind of had an impact on you a lot, which kind of inspired you to do what you're doing right now?
Three people. I think I don't know if there are specific people, but I think
Mm-hmm.
there have been. I think I'm largely thankful to my family, and they inspire me in multiple ways, because my mom gives me a lot of strength, a lot of courage, and a lot of freedom to follow my dreams. My dad gives
Mm-hmm.
me a lot of conviction to, to build hard work into my systems and go
Mm-hmm.
after what I want to achieve it. My
Yeah.
sister gives me a lot of passion in terms of, ensuring that I can live my life to the fullest. So I think
Yeah.
my family has been a huge system support. Every founder that I host on the podcast, and I think that's one of the best things about running a podcast, it's that
Mm-hmm.
you get to learn and seek so much inspiration from the
Yeah.
people that you end up talking to. And
Right.
so that has been a huge source of motivation. And with everything that I'm doing professionally and personally, having a set of mentors that have really helped me in the industry,
Mm-hmm.
and having a strong friend circle really helps. I think in terms of mentors, there have been a lot of people. I mean, Akash is a fellow podcaster who's been supremely helpful to me.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of founders that have become really close. So I mean, Abhishek Gol is the founder of Traction. He's been a close mentor to me and very, very
Mm-hmm.
helpful. And I look up to him in a lot of aspects of what he's done. There's somebody called Kaushik who's been a super close mentor as well. And so all of these people have really helped me. And then a lot of my friends from the ecosystem, right? I think the good part about India's startup ecosystem is that you'll find everybody, or a large majority of the people, who are there to understand what you want and then support you all in, and even keep
Mm-hmm.
you in front of them sometimes. And there's such a positive mindset culture.
Yeah.
So a lot of the friends that I have, I really feel thankful for them, because they've helped me at each step of the way. And all of these people have been inspirational in some shape or form, because I think people who are close to us give us the best set of motivation
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
inspiration. And I think I've been very lucky to do what I have been. I don't think I would have been able to do it without their support and help.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah. Awesome, man. So about you know, you said you have a couple of mentors as well. So how did you find a mentor? Like, how did they become your mentor?
I think one of the things that helps, especially, and it's true for the startup side of things, right? It's just,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, talking to as many people as possible, right? Because a perspective exchange is so important in this industry, because I mean, otherwise you're just thinking from one dimension, which is your thought process. But the more people you talk to, the
Mm-hmm.
more thoughts add on to you, and then you can develop a more rounded perspective to things. So I think I've come across these people that I mentioned, right, in some shape or form through my interactions. Like I got in touch with Akash because I was starting a podcast. He was already running one. Got in touch with Abhishek because I hosted him on the show. Got in
Mm-hmm.
touch with Kaushik because I hosted him on the show, and everybody else, right? So I mean, just the podcast helps, but then being your authentic self and putting out,
Yeah.
what do you want to learn from somebody out there can be a huge thing to just gain a lot of perspective, a lot of mentorship from the people who have the time, bandwidth, and empathy for. And I
Yeah.
feel
Yeah.
really glad that all of these folks in some shape or form continue to help me out, and so
Mm-hmm.
that's there. So I think finding mentors, you can't go out there and be like, mentor me, but you can go out there and talk to a lot of people. And if you find somebody whom you think
Mm-hmm.
you really, really want to learn from, then you can put it out there, that this is what I would hope to learn. This is what I can do. Why don't we, stay in touch, and why don't
Mm-hmm.
we talk often so that we
Yeah,
can exchange thoughts? So I think that helps.
amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you're 23. Like my another
Yeah.
question was how old are you, but it's already mentioned on your social media, so you're 23, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I'm 23.
and I assume you're not married, and
I'm not married. Yes.
are you in a relationship or single?
Yeah. I'm in a relationship.
Cool. Awesome,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, amazing, Jivraj. It was really great talking to you, man. Like, I wasn't expecting this much of insight. Like, I got a lot of insight and value from this podcast. So, yeah, it was amazing talking to you. Thank you so much for doing this.
My absolute pleasure. I love the questions, Pushpak, and thanks for having me. I hope everybody listening in enjoys. But yeah, thanks for having me.